Am I here? I'm here.
Yes, you're here.
And Genevieve is here too. Yay. Oh, okay. Well, first up, hello to everybody out there all over the pandemic world who are tuning in live for the talk. I know that, because Texas just basically Texas exploded in the last few weeks. And so I know some of you did not get the book as quickly as we normally get it to you. So what we'll do is for the first part, we'll do it with no spoilers. And then once I start asking questions that get further into it, I'll let you know. So I want to, first of all, welcome Genevieve Gornichec, who wrote this amazing book, A Witch's Heart.
Thank you.
Oh my goodness. I loved this book so much. So I have to say that everything that I know about Norse mythology, I learned from Marvel movies and Neil Gaiman. That's it. So I was a little bit concerned that I wouldn't be able to totally get this, and I absolutely loved it. So thank you for writing it.
Thank you for reading it.
Oh my gosh, so good. So I have a lot of questions for you, but I will say first, before we get started, so as usual, usually like the first 30 minutes or so, we just kind of, talk about the book. And then the last 30 minutes, we open it up to Q&A from everybody in the audience. So anybody out in the audience, if you want to submit a question for Genevieve to ask, you can submit it at any time. If you go down to the bottom of your screen where it says like chat, share screen, blah, blah, blah. Well, yours doesn't say share screen, I think, but it should have a little thing called Q&A. If you click on there, you can write your questions, and then Elizabeth texts them over to me, and then I ask them for you. So fingers crossed, this is all gonna work. So the first thing that we always do is we ask the same 5 weird questions that we ask to every single author, and they're ridiculous, but bear with me. So the first one is, 2 weeks into the zombie apocalypse, where will you be?
Hiding out on a farm.
Walking Dead. Yep. What is an underrated book that you think everybody should read?
That's so hard.
I know.
Oh I'm sorry. There's so many that come to mind. I'm looking at my bookshelf. Oh my gosh, this is probably going to be these 5 questions are probably going to be the hardest ones that you ask me. Oh my gosh. I'm going to say The Luminous Dead by Caitlin Starling, because it's this claustrophobic cave adventure. There's 2 characters in the whole book, and I haven't heard a lot of people talk about it, but I'm friends with Caitlin now, and I'm in an anthology with her, and I picked up her work, and I was oh, this is a really good book. So I highly recommend that book. Okay, I'm putting it on my to be read stack, which is very large. And I feel that.
Okay. What is your favorite word?
Oh.
You can think of that.
Delightful. It's a word that people don't use enough. My best friend from college used to say, I'm a delight. And I'm I've never heard somebody use that word before, in real life. So now I use it all the time.
I love it. I have a tendency to overuse lovely, but I think it's such a great word. It's so everything is lovely and people are lovely, and I think it's because I watch too much BBC and they use that word a lot. So, and they also use delightful. So I think we match.
Yes.
How do you like your eggs?
Oh, over easy.
Good job. And
Did I pass?
you did. So far you have, but this is the last question.
Oh no.
Will you be my friend?
Yes.
Okay, yay.
Of course.
Awesome. But somebody one day is going to say, fuck no, and then just delete, like just get rid, and I'll just be like, okay, well that just happened.
That's so
Okay.
mean. I hope nobody ever does that.
Me too, just because all of the people that I pick for this are people who I'm like, oh, I really want to talk to them, but also it would be kind of an interesting story to be like, so this one time Stephen King was such a bastard. Not that I think he would do that, but he might.
Right.
He's unpredictable. So let's talk about this book. So tell me first off, I mean, obviously, your inspiration was Norse mythology, but it goes deeper than that. Can you tell us about like what made you start writing this particular book?
So I was in a Norse mythology class in college because my college had a Norse mythology class. And I was already kind of deep into my obsession by then. I studied abroad in Sweden for a semester, and then I came back and I took a class on Old Norse, and I fell in love with the subject material. The first story that we ever translated was the one about Loki and the horse. So I was like, yeah, I had read Norse mythology as a kid, but I forgot how weird it was, like as an adult. And to be able to like translate some of the stories from their original sources, like I was totally geeking out over it. So I took the next, like the professor's like next class, and she was just great. And so I was in the Norse mythology class, and I just, a lot of the women in Norse mythology, like there's a lot of them, but a lot of them are just name dropped. Like they don't really do anything. And I feel like a lot of it was kind of lost, like didn't get passed down to us for over like the past, 1,000 years. And I just kind of wanted to like explore like a what if version of like a female character's side story. So that's kind of the angle that I took. She's just this character that I stumbled upon while I was reading, and I just thought she was so interesting, and she had things in common with like other giantesses in the mythology, and I was like, this would be a really neat character to explore.
Yes, yeah. Well, and it absolutely is. I mean, as I was reading it was so when I first started, I had like a little bit of a hard time because I would be like, wait, is that, I don't want to say is that true, because obviously they're myths, but I would be like, well, is she making that part up, or is it? And so I went and I just like went to the Wikipedia page, and I was just like, tell me about Loki in 4 paragraphs. Tell me that. And I was really surprised to find that this particular character, I'm going to say her name wrong, so I'm just going to call her Boda. I was really shocked at how little information. I mean, there was just, other than like, this chick is evil, she lives in a cave and she like births monsters, and that's it. Something that I thought was interesting is in reading that, it reminded me of Lilith, the like, biblical Lilith, who's Adam's first wife. And she's like super independent. She's like, fuck this, I'm out. And she goes and lives in a cave. And she's like the mother of monsters. And everybody's like, she's evil. But she never gets to tell her story. Like nobody ever tells her story. And this, in so many ways, it felt like, oh, I bet this is like a Lilith story. Like finally we get to see the background.
That's awesome.
Right. It was fantastic. So why is it, and maybe I'm alone in this, why do we love Loki even though he's such an asshole?
Are we talking like just in my book, or the broader, the myths at large?
Every Loki. But this Loki also in particular, just his witticisms, and I was like, oh, I want to save Boda from him, but also I'm like, oh, I get it, girl, I get it.
Loki is so interesting. I could talk endlessly about Loki. So it's really interesting that there's not a lot of evidence for him like being worshipped as a god in the Viking Age. Like we don't have a lot of evidence of like how the Viking Age people would have worshipped the gods anyway, but like there's a lot more evidence to indicate that like Thor and like Odin and Frey and Tyr were all worshipped. And that's why it's so interesting to me that Loki is so popular today. Like not just among like people who like Marvel, but also among like people who like practice Norse paganism. So it's like he's like, I don't even know how to describe. I wrote an essay on this once.
Oh,
But and I didn't come to any conclusions. So I think Loki is, as my editor described him, he's like the lovable scoundrel character, at least in The Witch's Heart. He you know, he has these witticisms and he's like such like this changing kind of force in the book. And you never really know where he's at. Like even at the very, very end of the book, like not really a spoiler, but Angerboda has this moment at the end of the book where she kind of wonders like if you know, he was playing the long game with a certain other character, like because you just never know with Loki, like and that's what makes him so interesting as a character. He means a lot to a lot of people right now, and I just think that that's so important.
yeah, I think like he reminds me a lot of like Puck, you know, just this character of it's almost like he has no control over the fact that what he must do is make things interesting. That's just where he's just like, I'm gonna have to make it interesting, and that's gonna either be really good or real bad. But this is my role, and I have no other choice.
Yeah, and that it's interesting because in that Norse mythology class I was in, my professor gave us free reign to write our term paper topics. I wrote mine on Angerboda because that is who I am as a person. But she said, and I quote, "Don't write a paper about how all the myths would be different without Loki. Someone tries it every year. Don't be that person." Like, because Loki really is like the only character in Norse mythology who has like an arc. Like he starts off like good and ends bad, like depending on who you're talking to. So of course he's, you know, everything would be different without him. So that just stuck with me as just being really funny. Like he really is the only character that goes through like this change.
Yes, yeah, and I love Helena in the comments saying Loki reminds me of every bad boyfriend who was amazing in bed. Yep, yep. Let's see. So, okay, I'm gonna skip over this one because there's a spoiler on that one, and for the moment, and I'm gonna go to why do you think we're still so fascinated with Norse myths? Well, I guess with mythology in general, because if you look at it from with you know, from a distance, you look at it and you go like, what? Some guy had sex with horses and then he did this thing and then and like if I was telling the story without any storytelling talent to somebody, they'd be like, you're super high and you're scaring me. Go away. But we're still so fascinated with these stories. Why do you think it is that you know 1,000 years later we're still telling and retelling these stories?
I think like something about them just resonates with us, like thematically or for me like it's the characters. It's less the themes and more the characters because I love character driven stories. But yeah, I think for me like it was less about the overall themes of the mythology and more about like me feeling connected to like these gods and goddesses and giants and like, you know, almost like trying to find common ground with them, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yes,
That
yeah,
was a
no,
really good
no,
question.
it totally does, and it's weird how even though the stories are so like absolutely ridiculous, if you look at the details, they're still so relatable in so many
Yes.
ways. Where I'm like, that would totally suck to have to, you know, have an eight-legged horse that you birth after you get like, that's awful. Like, oh, okay, well, it's nice that they're, you know, that they were, you know, checking out, you know, gender roles back then, and they were more
Yes.
fluid, and they like, I love that.
Oh, I could go on at length about Viking Age gender roles, but we'll not do that.
Well, I think we will after we do the
Ooh.
spoilers because I've got some questions that come around on that. Let's see. So, okay, so I heard a rumor, and I'm not sure if this is true or not, but I heard a rumor that you wrote this in like weeks. Is that possible? Because it took me 5 years to write just my last book.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, to be fair, it was the first draft. Took 3 weeks. I wrote it for NaNoWriMo in 2011, and I sat on it for 7 years before trying to do anything with it. And then the entire second half has been rewritten 3 times now. So yeah, first draft 3 weeks, the rest of it a little bit longer.
Okay, so what happened in the 7 years? Like, you put it in a drawer. What made you come back 7 years later to be like, let me get this back out of the drawer again?
So I tried to get an agent with 2 of the other books that I written. I had written 4 other books, 2 of a series and 2 of another series, and I tried to get an agent using the first book in each of those series, and I tried for 5 years. And so I was like, it's discouraging. I got like hundreds of rejections. It's par for the course in publishing, which you know, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
But then finally I just got to this point where I was like, you know what, like The Witch's Heart is like the biggest piece of my soul, I feel like, that I've ever written. And I kind of wanted to keep it close because of the element of rejection in publishing. I didn't think I could handle it because I was like, this is so personal. It was a true passion project. But on the other hand, I was like, I want to be traditionally published. Like, this is what I want to do. And if it's not this book, then that's it. And that's a bad thing to say. Don't say that to yourselves. Anybody who's listening to this and is writing, don't give yourself that ultimatum. But for me, it actually did work. Like, 7 years later, I finally just put it out there and had an agent and a book deal within 6 months. So after waiting for 5 years, or trying for 5 years, so it was a lot.
That is awesome. I love that. And I love that I was like, she wrote this in 3 weeks. Like, what the, and then you're like, and then there was a 7-year lag where I wasn't sure. So, okay. I love you again.
Thank you.
So I am now going to say, here there be spoilers. So, although they're not super spoilers, because I think everybody kind of knows a lot of this stuff, but there's definitely spoilers specific to this book. So if you haven't completely read it, it's not going to ruin the book for you. I don't think there are any twists that are like Ragnarok happen. But if you want to tune out and then come back whenever, we'll put it up on YouTube so that you can watch it later. So I have, first of all, oh my gosh, I love Skady. Am I saying this right? Is it Skady? Scotty. Oh, I love her so much. I was so, because the whole time, and I'm going through and I'm like, I get it, the Loki, like, yeah, I get it. But and I was just like, oh, get with Scotty, please do make this happen. And you sort of hinted, and then you did it. I was, oh my God, so happy. So happy. And so it was Skadi, was she like real in Norse mythology, or is she like a totally made up?
She's real. She's my favorite. She's my favorite. So Skadi, or I guess like in Old Norse, it would be like Skadi, or Old Norse Icelandic. So if I lapse into that pronunciation, I apologize. But Angerboda is the same way. Like, that D is actually a th. Sorry. I anglicized all of the names in the book on purpose, like for that exact reason. Because the pronunciations between like Old Norse, Modern Icelandic, and like the modern Scandinavian languages are just like blah. So I'm like, anglicize. Anyway, sorry, tangent. Skadi is very real. Her claim to fame at the beginning of the book, sort of, and near the beginning of the mythology, is that the gods do kill her father. That's a whole nother story. And Loki was involved, whole nother story. But she puts on her armor and grabs her weapons and like marches to Asgard and is like, anybody gonna come out and play, or are you gonna compensate me for my father's death? Like, so whether or not it was good compensation that she got is up for debate. Loki did tie his testicles to a goat to make her laugh. I did not make that up in the book. That is 100% in the mythology. And she hangs the snake above his head when he's found in the cave. That's in the mythology too. And you could argue that it was just because he had a hand in her father's death. It could be because some of the things that he said at the gods' feast before he got caught were very unkind, and she was upset about that. Or it could be that she was in love with one of his wives. I just made that up. And then put it in a book. That is not in the mythology. Scully and Angrboda don't even meet in the mythology. So that was all me.
Well, I'm so glad that they got together, because not only because I love them, but also because there was something so healing about that relationship, and the way that they loved each other. But then at the same time, I was like, but I kind of want Loki to come back, and then maybe they're like a poly relationship, where they're like love, hate, and I was like, I would watch this show. I would watch this show every night if it was just those three. Oh, it'd be so good.
It's funny that you mentioned poly, because one of the things like where I'm like, we could have had it all, is because a lot of people ship Loki, Angrboda, and Sigyn, his other wife, like as a poly. Like, and I was like, oh, I hope somebody writes that story, because I want to read that story. That would be so interesting. There are so many things where people's theories about Norse mythology and like their fan ships and everything, where I'm like, I am not the right person to write this story, but I would read this story.
Yes.
It's so much fun.
So I'm going to mispronounce her name, because is it Sigyn? Is that?
I also mispronounce her name.
Okay, good.
It's a tough one.
Okay. Because I would have said Sigyn before, and I don't even know. So I had read before a little bit of her story, and especially like in like Neil Gaiman's Sandman, he touches a little bit on that, especially on the bowl with the poison and all of that. And I never really liked her, just because I thought like she just seemed really, like in my opinion, I was just like, just tell him to fuck off and just go live your life, go. But when I read this, I went into it the same way, and even at first, like I was just like, that bitch, I can't believe she did that, but by the time that I got further in, I was like, oh, she's so much deeper than that. And I loved where she and Boda forgave each other, and I think that was such a theme that it kept coming back to in this book of not only forgiving each other, but also forgiving ourselves, like especially like Boda having to forgive herself for forgetting her past lives and letting everything sort of fall away because she had died. Was that like an intentional theme?
Yeah. And what's funny is that like, yeah, it was intentional, but there's also so many ways that the story could have been written, because really all we know about Sigyn is that she is the mother of Loki's 2 sons, and that she holds the bowl when he's bound. Just like all we know about Angrboda is that she, gave birth to these children, and that's it. And Loki's like the other parent of these children. So like, there are so many ways that this could have been done. They don't even meet in the myths like on screen. So we just don't know. Like, this is just my take. And just what I did with it. And other people have done a lot of things with it too. I poked my head into like the Norse mythology fandom like back like 10 or 12 years ago. And Sigyn was getting a lot of love, and Angrboda was getting vilified. At least back then. I have no idea what it's like now. But that was part of why I was like, I want to write this character's story, because she's not getting enough attention. At least at the time.
Right.
Like I said, I haven't touched it in many years.
Oh my gosh. Well, I loved it, and it actually reminded me of like my favorite sort of fanfic, where it's like, yeah, and then what if this happened? And what if there's something so freeing about just being like, what if canon was just a suggestion, and then all this other stuff happens? Which I absolutely, so good. In fact, I told my daughter, I was like, listen, you're gonna really like this book. This is like all of your like all of your Dungeons and Dragons, sort of stuff where you make up these stories and they're kind of based on the thing. And she was like, okay, maybe. And I'm like, there's a great lesbian relationship. And she was like, I'm in. So
nice.
Yeah. So good job. Uh, let's see. So, oh, and Elizabeth wanted me to remind everybody, because I still have a couple more questions, but I will turn them over to your questions. So drop your questions in the Q&A if you have any. Otherwise, I'll just keep talking for the next 30 minutes, which I can easily do about this. Okay, so I'm going to say his name wrong too. Balder?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, okay, so I really wanted to love him because I love how he took care of Hal, and he was like, I had this feeling that that he loved her from the very beginning, and he wanted to be with her, and that's sort of why he had I know he in the myths he had kind of wanted deaths in some of the myths, but then I was so torn because his wife Nana dies of grief, and they're like, just throw her body on him, and then where is she? What happened to her?
I had a whole paragraph in there, a whole explanation conversation at the end of the book that didn't make the final cut of the book because word count. So that was kind of a deleted scene because Angrboda, I think in the final version, she does ask him, where's your wife? And he deflects, like Loki. So I guess she's used to just men deflecting her questions all the time because she's just so used to it from Loki. But basically, gosh, what even did happen to her? It's just what happened to Balder's brother, who was the one who actually shot the arrow. He comes back afterward at the when Ragnarok's over and some of the gods come back, and he's one of them who oh, kitty.
That was my cat, sorry.
That's okay. Balder's one of the ones who comes back after Ragnarok, and that I picture Nana coming back too. In my mind, their breakup was amicable. I'm not good with spoken words.
Yeah, that sounds right.
I'm more good with writing words.
All of the words that I've only read in books, and I think I'm real smart. On the SATs, I did great, but if I had to say them out loud, no idea.
Yes, same.
That would be the next book that I would want. I would want the Nana book. I want the what's her story, right?
So many of the goddesses just don't have a story at all. That's all we know about her too, is she dies of grief and is put on Baldur's pyre. And
that's such a just toss her in there too. We're already having a funeral pyre. Just toss her in. It's so yeah. Okay, so speaking of other books that I want to read, what's next for you? What are you doing?
Oh my gosh.
What are you working on now?
Oh my gosh. I can't really say. Okay. But I am working on a passion project, my emotional support project, which is heavily related to The Witch's Heart. But it's just an emotional support project for right now. I can't really say anything more than that. It's one of those things where the thing that you should be working on, and then there's the thing that you just want to be working on. It's the latter.
Oh my God, I love it. I love it. Well, I can't wait to see it, even if it never ends up on anything other than your sock drawer, in which case I will sneak into your house and go through your sock drawer. And you'll see me over in a corner with your cat with a flashlight, and I'm just reading, and I'm just just writing little notes, and I'm like, yeah, oh yeah, and where's this character? And yeah, I think I might get arrested, but it'll be fine. It'll be fine.
I'll leave the door unlocked for you. Just let me know when you're not sneaking into my house.
Good. Let's see. Okay, so you wrote this in 3 weeks. Tell me your what are your secrets when it comes to writing, editing? What are things that you've learned that you're oh, this is what works for me?
For me, I'm an extremely linear writer. Some writers hop around. I have to go from the beginning and just beginning to end. That's just how I do it. I don't really, I'm also a pantser. I don't know if you're familiar with the term.
Somebody that pulls pants off of people while they're standing in the lobby?
No, so there's pantsers and there's plotters. Plotters have like a 30-page outline and they follow it while they're writing. And pantsers have no idea what is happening in their book until they write it because they're flying by the seat of their pants.
Okay.
I am a pantser. I don't know what's going to happen until I write it. And for Norse mythology, that was fine because I had the myths as like the bones of the plot of The Witch's Heart. But when it comes to like drafting another project from scratch, it's like, well, what's going to happen in the book? I don't know. I haven't wrote it yet. So that's, revision is my best friend. But in order to do that, like, I have to really get to know the characters. So, and then I kind of find out what's going to happen, like based on what they would do and the decisions they would make.
So the original version of The Witch's Heart, did it have a different end or a different tone or a different? You don't have to say if you're not comfortable with it.
No, the original ending was very bad. It was terrible. It was horrible. It was very unsatisfying. And my editor even taking on this book was conditional upon me rewriting the ending. Because the original ending is very sad. And basically, but the way she phrased it to me was not like, you better rewrite this book or we won't sign you. It was more like, I know that you can craft a more satisfying ending for this story while still staying true to your source material. And that was a challenge because anytime you have a book that has a prophecy in it, like it gets to a certain point where like the characters are just kind of rolling with it and they don't really have any agency. They're not really making their own decisions because all of their decisions feed into this prophecy. So like my challenge then was to be like, okay, like how is Angerboda going to tackle this? Like this fate isn't changing. So like, what is she going to do about it? And then the question is whether or not she actually plays into the prophecy herself. But you know, like I'm never writing a book with prophecy in it ever again because it was so hard.
Well, it's like you start with the end paragraph, you know, where you're like, well, I've got to make it fit into this.
Right.
I can't even imagine it. I think what's really it's that people don't look at is how important it is to have an editor or an agent or even just readers who will challenge you and be like, but in a nice way, because I get easily crushed. Like my agent just is always like, this is great. Maybe not for a book, but it's really great, you know, and she's so nice about it. But so encouraging when I'm on the right path. And if you don't have someone like that who is behind you saying like, you can do better, even if it's just destroys you, where you're like, I don't know how to, it makes such a difference.
Yeah, definitely. And that's like something that I've had to come to terms with, like on my publishing journey, is that not all criticism is given in good faith. Not all criticism is meant to make you a better writer or better storyteller. So you have to find the people who have your best interests at heart and care about your writing and your craft and listen to them, because they're the ones who are going to push when they need to push and try to make you better instead of criticizing to tear you down. So yeah.
I think that's one of the hardest things that I had to learn when my first book came out was like, don't read the ratings, don't read the reviews, don't like, what you need to do is you need to have a really good friend who will go in and read them for you and then give you just like a generic, like in general, people love this chapter, they kind of like, but mostly because otherwise you're going to read like, you know, 20 great, like this is so wonderful and it's amazing, and then you read the one that's going to be like, this is shit, and that's all you can think of, that's it, and then you can't write again because you're stuck and you're like, everything I write is shit because Bob from Seattle said it. So oh wait a second, hang on a second, Elizabeth is saying that there's some questions in the Q&A, but she's having some problems seeing all of them. So wait, so do I see that tab? I do see the tab. Oh, I do. Okay. Elizabeth, don't worry about it. I can see them. Elizabeth was like, where are the questions? And that's why. Okay. So, so this one's from Dawn. So, Boda made me laugh several times. Did you mean to write her so snarky and sarcastic, or was that just my inner self seeing it that way because I love her?
No, well, thank you. And also, yeah, that was intentional. Just because like she's so old and she's just seen it all and she's just absolutely unflappable. Like, you know, like things happen and she's like, oh, that happened. So yeah, that was intentional on my part. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thank you.
There was a line, and I'm not going to say it right, I'm sure, but it was something about, like, and she looked up with the look of someone who had been strangled and beaten and burned to death and interrupted, and I was just like, I fucking will.
By the very same group of people who had stolen her children away from her tonight. Yes, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
Oh, it's one of my favorite lines. I laughed. Oh my god, it was so good.
So glad that made the final cut.
So good. So good.
Myself up.
Let's see. Helena says, my friend Allison, who is on this chat from Staten Island, New York, and I were chatting about how the trickster characters are so annoying. And then Allison noted that the trickster archetype is never female. Is it your experience of the lore that the female, if she is a trickster, really ends up just being cast as fully evil?
Such a good question. That's a great question. And I think it's interesting, again, because Loki can change shape, and Loki, for a stretch in the comics, I don't know if this is the case now, but like is Lady Loki. And I don't know, from what I've seen, like seems to be, if anybody's read the comics and can correct me on this, but like she seemed pretty dastardly from like the clips that I saw of the comics. So, like, I think you're onto something there.
Right?
God, that's so interesting. Oh,
right?
Somebody write that paper. Somebody write that book. That's such a great question. It's amazing.
Eden said, is there any basis in the myths for Scotty and Boda's relationship, or was that completely your twist on the story?
That was me. They don't even meet in the myths.
I'm going to say it's canon now. It is now canon. We're going back 1,000 years. Let's see. Christy said, I'm still reading, but I just saw the audiobook narrator. Do you have anything to do with choosing who narrates?
So I got a say in it. Basically, the person who was producing the audiobook was like, hey, I'm producing the audiobook. When I read your book, this was the first person I thought of, like, what do you think? And then sent me some samples. And I was like, yes. So I feel like if I would have said no, then, they might have taken that into account. But I guess I just got really lucky, and I just love the first person that they suggested.
That's a really good question. And Christy also says, I really like it. I hope it was a good experience. So
thank you. Thank you so much.
That's a really good question, because I always narrate my own books just because I'm telling my story, and so it makes sense. I never even thought about that of letting someone else read your. Have you listened to the audio? Can you stand to listen to somebody else reading your words?
I can't even read my own words. I'm like, oh God, do I have to read this book again ever? Maybe. But I listened to like the first 30 minutes of the audiobook because I just wanted to get to Scotty. I just wanted to hear her. And then I was like, I'm good. And I thought I enjoyed it. But I haven't listened to the whole thing. I don't know if I can. I don't know if I could do it.
Let's see. Eden asks, what was the determining factor in who survived Ragnarok and who did not?
That is a great question. So in Norse mythology, there are certain gods who survive, and also like a human man and woman. But it's in the myths who comes back. Balder, his brother Hod, Magni and Modi, who are Thor's sons. And they don't say anything about anyone, the goddesses or anything. So I was like, loophole. We don't know what happens to a lot of them because it's just never said. So why not?
Love it.
Great question.
Let's see. I would really love for you to tell, I don't know if I'm going to say this right, Eden story? Or maybe Iden, Idunn. Who knows? I don't know how to pronounce anything. Which goddess would you like to write about next? Is that a sport? Are you like, that's my emotional support character and I can't?
That's my emotional, Skadi Theatsadottir is my emotional support character right now. I love her so much. And I hope that other people write stories about the goddesses now. I really, really do. I know that, like I've met a couple people now on Twitter who are writing like Norse goddess stories. I'm like, yes, give them to me. I want to read them.
Right. So good. Let's see. Bridget asks, what do you see as Loki's reasoning for staying with the, I'm going to say this wrong too, Azar? Aesir? How do you pronounce that?
Aesir?
Aesir? Yeah.
Aesir, yeah.
I'm just going to say with the gods that are up there. Is it his longing for legacy or is it something else?
So I think that is super debatable because I wondered the same thing in the myths, like while I was reading them. So part of the whole story is that I kind of had to make up his reasoning for like doing things, make up other characters' reasonings for doing things too, because in the myths we're just told, and then this happened, and then this happened, and with no like insight as to the characters' motivations a lot of the time. So I was like, reading the myths, it's like, well, Loki's still here. Wonder why. So yeah, so I don't want to say, oh, it's because he's there in the myths, but it's because he's there in the myths, and I kind of had to figure out like, okay, you know, the thing that I like the most about American Gods, I haven't seen the show, but the book, is Loki and Odin as a two-man con, as being blood brothers, because they're both very sneaky. And I like the idea of like Loki staying in Asgard because he has his own agenda, or Odin has his own agenda, and there's just things working in the background that not everybody else is privy to. Like that is my personal theory, but there could be a lot of reasons. It's an amazing question.
Well, like one of the things that you sort of touch on in the book that that explained for me some of his motivation in a way that made sense was, yeah, basically you just kind of said like, well, I'm bored everywhere else, but I'm not bored with you. And there was just something about that was like, okay, that's legit. That's a legit motivation.
Yes.
For a lot of us.
Right. And like, you know, Odin is said to like wander a lot, and I feel like Loki, like nobody else in Asgard is like on his level in terms of like sass, and he just needs to just go sass people. Like he just needs to.
He's so much smarter than everybody. He seems like he sees like everything going like 18 steps ahead, and he's like, this is going to be boring. Let's fuck shit up. And then he does. I was also going to say you should watch American Gods because it's so good. It's so beautifully shot. And what I really love about it is that, so I have to watch it with the closed captions on because I have hearing problems, but it's really helpful to me because it'll say like underneath who the people are. And in my head, I don't pronounce ththose words in this. So I'm like, oh, that's how you say that. Oh, I didn't know. And then and I'll pause it and I'll have to look it up on Wikipedia and I'll be like, who's that? Who's that? And I'm like, okay, I think and then I'll pause it another time. I'll be like, Jesus, okay, I'll look up another person. So good. Let's see. Dawn says, was the she-wolf that came back to help her one of her original children? Good question.
Oh my gosh, that is a really good question. So the she-wolf came from the story in the myths about the giantess Hirukin, who rides a giant wolf with snakes for reins. And I was just like, this is a she-wolf, and she's Angrboda's animal companion now. So I kind of see the she-wolf as like being like a primordial wolf and not necessarily one of her children. I kind of like see them on like even footing in that regard, if that makes sense. That would be really cool though. But that's not in the book, so that could be canon if you want it to be canon, because Norse mythology.
Right. So speaking of giants, So like in my head, I always had a real problem with a lot of the Norse mythology because I would like look and I would be like, okay, Loki's supposed to be like really short and everybody, but then in your book you say like giant is like just it's a term, but some giants are actually is that real? I mean, real myth
Yeah.
real? Okay.
Yeah, giants was a mistranslation of Jotun or Jotnar, which is the plural. And I really kind of wanted to use those terms because they don't refer to like someone being large. They just refer to like a different race of beings in the myths. So that was problematic. I had to make some tough decisions about that as far as like, okay, if I use this word and then I use the plural of this word, like, is this going to be confusing for readers with all the other names in the book? So I end up just going with giants. And yeah, I'm sorry if that's like a little bit hard to imagine because most of them are people sized. But I didn't want to have to use those terms and like, potentially confuse people.
Well, it was very helpful for me that you had that part in there because I was like, oh, okay, that makes so much more sense. And I also liked how Loki had said, and they said it about maybe Hell too, I can't remember, um, but about how he really liked Boda because she had, and this is another one of those words that I can spell it, but I can't say it out loud, gravitas. I
Yeah.
think that's, and so for me, I was like, maybe that's what being a giant is about. It's like this giant, personality or this giant character, and I was like, okay, all right, it made so much more sense. Because before I was just like, how's he having sex with a giant? And then it's
Yeah.
snake comes out. What's happening? Okay.
Yeah, it's just think of them as just a different race of beings. Like the Aesir, there's the Vanir, and then there's the Jotnar who live in Jotunheim. So yeah, that's that's like, like when a book is out and then you're like, oh man, I wish I could change one thing about this, like, but it's already out. And the thing that I would change is that how often Angrboda refers to the Aesir as gods when they should really just be the Aesir, like they're not gods to her. So
Yeah.
that's my one thing where I like look back at the book, I'm like, shouldn't have done that, but what am I gonna do now, right?
Right? Okay, so here's another good question. Is there any explanation in the myths why some of Angrboda's children are human and some are wolf and some are snake?
There are not.
All right, fair enough.
There's presented with no explanation.
Right. I mean, sometimes you birth a snake. That just happens.
I mean, one of their parents is a shapeshifter.
That does
so
make sense.
There's I mean, it's debated whether, they're just like, I think Angrboda even says this in the book, like they're giants in human form or giants in, giants in snake form, giants in wolf form, like, because the giants do shapeshift. So
yeah, that makes sense. And I like when you had Hell ask, why did he decide to look like that? I was just like, oh, okay, so maybe it was a choice. But then I was like, was it part of the prophecy where he was just like, oh, I can't help it, you made this prophecy and now I have to. And so yeah,
that was up for debate. Hell knows things though, so she just knows things.
Oh my gosh, she's my third favorite. Like Boda and Scotty, and then Hell. Like, oh my god, I want a whole graphic novel just about Hell, and everything that comes after, and everything that comes before. Oh my god,
yes.
Love. Okay, what do you think happened to Gerd?
I have so many feelings about what I did to her, but the kind of character that I made her. Because we only have the one poem about her. It's called Skinnersmal, and it's about how Gerd's just minding her own business, and Frey like sees her, like sits in Odin's seat where he could see all the worlds, and like sees Gerd and sends his servant to go bully Gerd into marrying him, and that's literally all we have.
Wow.
So that is definitely up for interpretation, like what happens to her after that, like whether or not she's like welcomed or not. I kind of went with not, just because the gods are allowed to marry giantesses, but it's not okay to do the other way around. And just the fact that she got bullied into it and threatened into it just makes me angry, and I don't think that a good relationship would have come of that personally. So that was my take. And also, I was clued into the existence of this book. It's called Bloodhoof. I don't know if it's showing up backwards, but it is like a minimalist like book about Gerd. So
Aww.
it's
Okay.
told in like verse, and I read it and I was just like, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry that I made you little misgender norms and then you disappear from the book and then never come back. Like, there's that's what I mean about there being so much more to like all of these goddesses and giantesses. Like, this mine is only one take.
You know what I loved though about what I loved about her though is that she was like genuinely flawed, but tried to be a good person, even though she failed a lot. And even when you could tell that she was like, this is not okay, this is not okay, things need to be done in, you know, this specific way, you could tell that in the end she had so much grief about like, I've made some bad decisions. And there was just such a vulnerability to her flaws and the way that they were sort of exploited, that there was a little part of me that was like, oh Gerd, but by the end I was like, oh Gerd, like I just want to rescue her and just be like, come back. It's okay. You made a mistake.
I know. Same.
Let's see. Casey says, I know absolutely nothing about Norse mythology other than the Thor movies. I know. I mean, honestly, a lot of us are in the same boat. I'm super curious now. Is there a good book or resource to start with for an intro into the world?
Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology is the most recent retelling that has come out. Highly recommend. There's also Kevin Crossley Holland's Norse Myths, which is the one that I started with. It's pretty faithful to the original stories. And then there is the Prose Edda and the Poetic Edda, which are our main sources of the myths in general. So like that's where all the retellings come from, is those two books that, well, the Poetic Edda is like a compilation of poems, and then the Prose Edda was written down in the 1200s by one guy. We have an author for that one. The poems are anonymous, but there's evidence that they were floating around in the oral tradition like since the Viking Age, and then they were written down after. Yes, so after, because the Vikings, like they carved runes on stuff, but they didn't like write in books the way that like we think of writing. So they passed their stories down orally. And sorry, I could go on at length about this, but the Prose Edda and the Poetic Edda are a great place to start, probably like after you read the retellings, just because it is like original source material and some of it's a little bit tough to get through.
Very good answer. Let's see. Eden says, Genevieve, can you show everyone the picture of Angerboda in the Norse gods book on the shelf behind you?
I can, yes. Oh my gosh. So this picture is like so important to me. Because the one thing that I have noticed that like a lot of illustrations of the gods and goddesses have in common is that like they're not like exactly how I picture them, at least, but the vibes are always on point. Like, it's just amazing. So let me find her, and highly recommend this book if you guys can get your hands on it. I see people in the comments saying that it's great. It is great. Highly recommend. And the artist is also doing like on Twitter right now, is posting that he is doing like a poster series of them. So for a limited time, he's like selling posters of each of them. This is Angerboda from that book.
Wow.
The vibes though, am I right?
Oh my God.
Just amazing. I just love this book so much. Yes.
Oh
I love this book. I love this book. And I think Scotty is only like a corner illustration in here somewhere. Yes. She's got a mohawk.
Oh my God, love.
So cool. Love this book. Love this book. Thank you, somebody who pointed out that this book was on my shelf, because it's amazing.
Yeah,
highly recommend.
I'm adding that as well to the list of Elizabeth is going to be
Johan Akerkrantz.
Oh, I'm constantly like, Elizabeth, can you hold back this book for me? Can you hold back this book for? I'm gonna be like, Elizabeth, all the books on mythology. Let's see. Doris asks, I think I'm not smart enough to actually understand what this question is about. What would you say to Snorri Sturluson if he was on this call?
I'm sorry. That's the greatest question ever. I would ask him why he gives us hardly any physical descriptions of the gods, but thought it was important to mention that Loki was hot.
Well, he was, though.
Canonically, according to Snorri.
He must be. Oh, I love
That's
it.
Amazing. Oh, good old Snorri Sturluson, the infamous Snorri Sturluson. He wrote the Prose Edda, and he comes up with a lot of things that were like, where are you getting this from? But he's one of our two main sources for all of the mythology, so he must be taken with a grain of salt.
Love it.
Sorry.
Let's see. Kara says, any chance that this is going to be made into a movie to counteract the male-centric Marvel take on these stories? It would make a great movie. Agreed.
Thank you very much. I don't know anything about that. I genuinely don't. And if I did, I probably wouldn't be able to say. But I feel like that's a lot of people's dream, is to see their book made into a movie. So,
yes.
Or even like a Netflix special.
Well, I mean, it is interesting. There are some books that you read and you see them like in your head as a movie. And this definitely was for me. And in particular, I always have to read the books at least twice, sometimes 3 times, because I read them the first time when I'm going through and reading 11 books, and I'm like, one of these 11 books is going to be the pick. And so I read, and then after that, I'm like, okay, I think this is the best one, but let me go back and read it again. And then I read it again. And then by the time that it actually goes out to the Fantastic Strangelings, it's usually like 3 or 4 months later. And so I'm like, what was this book about again? And so yesterday I read it again, just so that I could like refresh my memory. And it's such a, like, for me, it's like a one-day read, just because it doesn't feel like I'm reading. Like, it just feels like I'm watching this movie in my head, which is not an easy thing to do. So good job.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I cannot believe we are literally down to the last minute, and we asked every single question, and every question that was in the Q&A. We planned this perfectly.
Wow.
Oh, this was so much fun. I am so glad thank you so much, not only for writing this book, but for putting it out in the world, especially during this really strange and weird time. And for coming on with us and for sharing your story and listening to me while I drink too much rum and
Thank you so much for choosing my book for your book club. Like, it's been an honor, and thank you so much to everybody who has like tagged me on Instagram to say nice things about the book. Like, I literally tried to respond to every single person, because this book has lived in my head for so long, and it's just crazy to me that people are reading it and enjoying it. So I really appreciate all of you so much. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Well, whenever your next book comes out, we'll have to do another Zoom call and discuss it. And I'll see you probably in about a week. I'll be sneaking over and in your sock drawer, and it's just me. It's just me.
Okay.
Please don't knife me. All right.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Mwah.